Chundra Lela, From Indian Priestess to Christian Evangelist, originally titled An Indian Priestess Chundra Lela, written by Ada Lee in 1903. This audiobook was produced by scrollreader.com. Introduction by George Kinnaird.
This book describes a remarkable life story, the long and weary search for peace, Hinduism's utter failure to assist, and the joyful reception of the true light. Those working in the mission field will find this story of great interest and encouragement. It should greatly strengthen the conviction of all who believe that if a country is to be won for Christ, it must be by means of native workers. What a hopeful outlook would there not be for India if as many native converts as Chundra Lela were gathered to the church? This story also appears to clearly demonstrate that the best and most useful workers in heathen countries will be those who understand the people's beliefs and have spent their lives in their midst. I trust this wonderful life will be read by many of our young workers and act as an inspiration.
Chapter 1. Chundra's Birth, Marriage and Widowhood.
60 years ago, a little Brahmin girl was born in the mountainous country of Nepal, to whom was given the name of Chundra Lela, which means playing of the moonbeams. Her father was a wealthy landowner, whose ancestors had been the family priests of the Raja of Nepal for centuries, with the first son of each family inheriting the position. Among his 4 wives, her mother was his favourite. At the early age of 7, Chundra Lela was married in great splendour and magnificence to the only son of another branch of the priesthood. In this marriage were centred all the hopes of the proud and prejudiced family. But one sad day, 2 years later, came word from her father-in-law's house that her husband was dead, and their only hope of an heir was now blasted, and Chundra Lela was now a child widow, the most despised of all creatures. There would now be no son to inherit the position of the priesthood. She remained in her father's house until she was 13 years old, during which time she learned to read her own language, and also Sanskrit, the mother of all languages in India. Her father, being a learned man, was her teacher. At this age, she went with her father on her first pilgrimage, a long and weary journey to Jagannath, a sacred shrine in the east of India. The fate of her father was no different from that of many other pilgrims there. He died suddenly, and as he was dying, he called Chundra Lela and said, "My child, I must leave you. Here is a bunch of keys. When you reach home, open the chests and boxes to which they belong, and what you find is yours, left to you by your husband." She took the keys, and with a sad heart, watched her father die. Soon his body was burned to ashes before her in that sacred spot, and then she was alone. Gloomy and cast down, she returned with some fellow pilgrims to her own land. She spent the following year in the close study of her sacred books. There she learned the dark, sad story of Hinduism. She read of the sacred places in India and the promises made to those who visit them. Among others was the promise of pardon for the sin which had caused widowhood, by the performance of Char Dham, the visiting and worshipping at the 4 great shrines situated at the 4 cardinal points of India. She determined she would do this, and everything else laid down in the sacred books of the Hindus. She made herself a long, narrow bag, and going to her boxes, took out from them the gold which had been left her by her husband. After filling the bag, she tied it around her waist. She took numbers of garments and packed them into bundles. She then selected 2 trusty maidservants and confided in them her secret, describing to them the eternal blessings which would come to them if they would take their journey with her. This they consented to do. Her 2 brothers and sisters with her stepmother were asleep in the house on that night, the night this young girl slipped away and began that awful journey in search of God. They spent 7 days crossing the rugged mountains to the plains below. There being no railway, she walked until tired, and then, to get some rest, she would hire a carriage or rickshaw for a while. But, walking along the road or riding, she counted her sacred beads and repeated incantation after incantation, which she had memorized from the Vedas and other sacred books. She bathed in every sacred river and worshipped at every shrine on her way, making offerings to the idols and giving gifts to Brahmin priests. On the way to the first of the 4 great shrines, she visited Calcutta, worshipping at Kalikat, the great temple from which Calcutta is named, and bathed in the Ganges. The temple stands on the banks of what used to be the Ganges River. But the stream has shifted, leaving a long distance away the old bed, which is filled with water daily from the rising tide. This is the most sacred shrine in Bengal and is visited by many thousands of pilgrims yearly. The main temple was built 3 centuries ago and was not affected by the recent earthquake. The image of the goddess is hideous in the extreme. She has a black face with a protruding tongue covered with blood and is adorned with a necklace of skulls. She is called the Bloody Goddess, and many goats and baby goats are sacrificed to her daily by her worshippers. On the regular festival days, the drain about the temple is said to flow full with the blood of her victims. The gloom and filth of the place, the rude clamour of the priests, the naked, besmeared bodies of her devotees, the quivering, bleeding bodies of the newly sacrificed animals, the sad bleating of the baby goats being led to the block are sights and sounds the visitor can never forget. At one time, human sacrifice was offered to this goddess, and thugs of India used to sharpen their knives before her and ask her blessing on their murderous deeds. Chundra Lela had travelled this route with her father the year before. This time, as then, she fell in with many fellow pilgrims on their way to the same place. There were many suffering from illness and hunger, dropping out of the way. Many of them died, away from loved ones and without reaching their goal. To these sights, she had become somewhat accustomed, yet her young heart often sank within her. Still, she pushed on, till at last, exhausted and weary, she came in sight of the world-renowned temple of Jagannath.
Chapter 2. The Temple of Jagannath.
This large and renowned temple is situated in Orissa, on India's east coast, dedicated to Jagannath, known as the Lord of the World. The term Jagannath comes from Jagat, meaning world, and Nath, meaning Lord. As far as Hindu gods go, this deity is among the least appealing and ugliest. It is only a stump of a body, having no legs and only parts of arms. The head, eyes and mouth are disproportionately large and imposing. According to one account, Jagannath's origin is as follows. The entire Orissa coast was once a dense jungle teeming with wild animals. Hidden within this forest was a shrine that evoked terrifying tales. These stories were so unsettling that no one dared to approach it. Intrigued, a great king decided to visit the shrine. He sent a holy priest to pave the way for his visit. Astonishingly, upon the priest's arrival, he found the jungle, including the shrine, had vanished, covered with sand. The king was deeply saddened, believing this to be a consequence of his excessive curiosity. Fearing divine anger, he began worshipping and offering sacrifices to Jagannath to appease any wrath. This devotion pleased the deity, who appeared to the king and instructed him to construct a new temple in place of the vanished one. The deity promised that a divine architect would fashion a new image to replace the missing one. The architect, using the trunk of a nim tree, beneath which the god Krishna had once been slain by a hunter, began his work. Supposedly, the tree had miraculously floated to this spot. The architect warned that he would abandon the project and not finish it if anyone disrupted his work before completion, and he would leave the god in an unfinished condition. After waiting for 2 weeks, the curious king visited the idol, prompting the architect to halt his work forever. Consequently, the god had only stumps for arms and no feet. Greatly disturbed by this outcome, the king obtained the bones of Krishna and placed them within the idol's body. Despite its grotesque appearance, the idol became one of India's most renowned deities. The temple itself is magnificent. The area extending 80 miles around it is considered sacred, believed to be the dwelling place of gods. During the Jagannath festival, countless pilgrims from across India converge on the site. These individuals endure extreme hardships, with many succumbing to starvation or illness during the journey, and many more perish after they arrive at that dreadful place. During the festival, the deity, along with images of his siblings, is carried out of the temple. Ropes are attached around their necks, hoisting them into elevated positions on a grand cart. This cart, shaped like a tower, and sometimes measuring up to 30 or 40 cubits in height, is adorned with explicit, indecent and obscene pictures and imagery that crowds of people, including men, women and children, gaze upon for hours. Enormous ropes, thick and lengthy, are connected to this structure. Crowds of hundreds, even thousands, grab hold of these ropes and pull the cart through the streets amidst a deafening chorus of cheers. The rush to secure a grip on the rope is fierce, with even elderly women clamouring for a place to touch or kiss it. In rainy and muddy conditions, it can take hours to set the bulky cart in motion. Those engaged in pulling the cart become covered in mud and shout with fervour, akin to demons. Some individuals throw themselves in front of the chariot, while others prostrate themselves in the mud beside it. As the chariot begins to move, the fervour of the crowd seems uncontrollable, their shouts resembling the frenzy of madmen. Were it not for the presence of the police force, it's quite possible that some fanatics might even place their own children beneath the giant wheels. During this festival, as in the past, numerous devotees might even sacrifice their bodies to this deity. The scene invokes indescribable horror. Chundra Lela journeyed to this initial of the 4 great shrines, spending 2 weeks worshipping this unsightly idol. Here she held a feast for Brahmins and gifted a cow to provide them with milk. She made 2 offerings to Jagannath, each costing 25 rupees. Having fulfilled all the requirements demanded by these sacred rites, she embarked again on her perilous journey to the second of the 4 great shrines. This one is located in the far south of India and requires several challenging months of travel to reach.
Romans chapter 1, verses 22 to 25. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images of mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore God gave them over in the desires of their hearts to impurity for the dishonoring of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is forever worthy of praise. Chapter 3. The Temple of Ramanath.
Ramanath is the second major shrine in India, located near Madura, on a small island near Ceylon. A rectangular enclosure about 600 feet long and 157 feet wide surrounds the temple on elevated ground in the northern part of the island. The entrance is accessed through a towering gateway, 100 feet high. The temple's grandeur lies in its corridors or open galleries, stretching to a combined length of almost 4,000 feet. These galleries are 20 to 30 feet wide and approximately 30 feet high. Some doorways and roofs employ stones as long as 40 feet. The temple was likely constructed in the 17th century. The linga, a rounded stone revered by Hindus, is believed to have been placed here by Ram. It's cleansed with water from the Ganges, and that same water is later sold to pilgrims. The temple is located where Ram, assisted by Hanuman and his army of monkeys, is said to have built a bridge across the strait connecting India to the island of Ceylon. He undertook this journey to rescue his beloved wife, Sita. This tale is recounted in the Ramayana, one of the most popular Hindu texts. Ram, the favoured son of a king, was thrust into the midst of a struggle due to his rise to the throne. As is often the case, this led to strife. However, being a profoundly virtuous individual, he chose to step down from the throne to avoid conflict. He and his beautiful wife, Sita, left their kingdom and lived as hermits in the forest. Sita, the object of envy for both gods and humans, remained unwaveringly loyal to her husband, even though many efforts were made to entice her away from her husband. In her devotion, she treated her husband as her god. Among Ram's rivals was Havana, the mighty king of Ceylon. Disguised as a beggar, Havana visited their dwelling after Ram was lured away by a deer, enticing him into a chase. To ensure her safety, Sita was placed within a protective circle, where no harm could fall on her. Upon Ram's absence, the monk approached Sita, requesting rice. People dared not to deny these religious beggars, so she felt compelled to step beyond the protective circle to offer him food. At that moment, the monk revealed his true form. Seizing the long-desired Sita, he transported her in his airborne chariot to his palace in Ceylon. Upon Ram's return and discovering his devoted wife missing, he wept and grieved like no other. Nature itself seemed to empathize with his sorrow, as birds and animals shared in his grief, and even the earth trembled from his lamentations. Hanuman, the monkey god, was the first to console Ram. He informed him that he had witnessed the king of Ceylon taking Sita away, and offered to retrieve her. Ram gave Hanuman a message for Sita and his signet ring, as a token of his love and faithfulness. The monkey took his journey, leaping over the channel to reach Ceylon's southern tip. Disguised as a rat, he sneaked into Sita's chamber, delivering Ram's message and the signet ring. After receiving Sita's messages of unwavering fidelity to Ram, Hanuman resumed his true form, ready to return. However, the people of Ceylon, observing his actions, arrested him as a spy and subjected him to a court trial before the king. He endured indignities, not even offered a seat, prompting him to sit on his coiled-up tail like a sailor's rope. Responding to the king with clever wit and humour, Hanuman brought roars of laughter from the assembly. Ultimately, the king's councillors recommended a punishment, tying a torch covered in pitch to Hanuman's tail and setting it ablaze before releasing him. The assembly unanimously agreed to this suggestion, and the sentence was carried out on Mr. Monkey. As the torch ignited, the monkey ran through the rice fields, setting the ripe grain on fire. He then scaled the houses, leaping from one to another, and ignited the thatched roofs. When the blaze was widespread, he extinguished it using his tail before smudging his face with his soot-covered hands. From then onward, the grey monkey with a black face and a long tail, the tip of which is black, roamed throughout India and became an object of worship for countless millions of misled individuals. On Hanuman's return, he rallied his army of monkeys. Guided by Ram, they journeyed to Ceylon to rescue the beautiful queen Sita. The channel between India and Ceylon was bridged by monkeys toppling mountains into the sea, allowing Ram and his loyal followers to cross on dry land. After a fierce battle, Sita was freed and reunited with her husband. This narrative, accepted by Orthodox Hindus to this day, is embodied in the Ramanath temple, visited by millions of devoted but deceived worshippers of this favoured, so-called God. After months turned into years, Chundra Lela finally reached the second of the 4 shrines. Here she worshipped Ram for 10 days, hosted a significant feast for Brahmins, and provided a cow to yield milk for Ramanath. She also acquired a small image of Ram, which she carried throughout her wanderings, revering him as her personal god. From this point, she continued her wearisome journey, sacred beads in hand, worshipping with all her blind devotion the only gods she knew.
Chapter 4. Sorrow and Suffering by the Way.
Travelling in those days was exceedingly difficult, but nothing could stop Chundra Lela from her quest. So on she journeyed day after day, until at last she came to the 3rd famous temple, Jagannath, in the extreme west of India. Dwaraka, the city of gates, is situated on the western coast of the Kathiawar Peninsula. The Puranas say this city was built by Krishna. It was defended by high ramparts and contained many beautiful gardens and water ponds. This is the scene of the activities and sinful doings of Krishna, the vilest god in the Hindu mythology. Hindus believe the temple was raised in one night miraculously. It consists of a shrine, a spacious auditorium, whose roof is supported by 60 granite and sandstone pillars, and a conical spire 170 feet high. There are 5 stories in the temple body, which is 100 feet high. According to legend, the sea rose on the day Krishna died and submerged the whole city, except for this temple. The sea has never been able to wash it away. The fact that millions of pilgrims visit this site is not surprising, since it is written about it. Whoever visits that holy shrine, where Krishna pursued his activities, is liberated from all sin. Here Chundra Lela painted her body with sandalwood and remained 15 days worshipping in the temple. She gave a feast and money to all the Brahmins and Fakirs. From here she proceeded to the last of the 4 great shrines, Badrinath, in the extreme north of India. This is a temple in honour of Vishnu, the god of preservation, and the figure of the deity is said to have been taken from the bottom of the river Alaknanda, one of the principal tributaries of the Ganges. The temple consists of a conical building surmounted by a copper dome which ends in a golden ball. It is situated high up amid the snows of the Himalaya range, 10,400 feet above the level of the sea. The sacred mount on which it stands, Badrinath, with its twin sister Kedranath nearby, charms the eye of every traveller passing over that beautiful mountain route from Nainital to Mussoorie. Oh, if those grand old peaks could tell all they know of human suffering, of the many longing hearts who have come for comfort, to find only suffering and death amid the very snows that so delight the artist's eye. Chundra Lela, with an expectant heart but a weary body, reached the base of this sacred mount. She and her 2 faithful companions began its climb. Soon their bare feet became numb with cold and cut and bleeding with the snow and ice. Here she gathered all the old clothes she could from her bundles, and they wrapped their poor bleeding feet with layer after layer, and proceeded on their way. Nothing daunted, although the air became more piercing every hour. Half dead, they crept along the still more dangerous path, clinging to ice, boulders, and frozen rocks until she touched the sacred spot. For 5 days she stayed, until she felt the god could require no more suffering from mortals than she had endured. They then began their weary descent, but Chundra Lela's heaviest burden was her sad and disappointed heart. 7 years had passed since she left her home and began this weary march in search of God, and had not found him yet. Lest she might leave something undone, she climbed to the temple on Jagannath and sprinkled the idol with Ganges water, which she had carried with her for the purpose. Her next stop was Hardware, a noteworthy place of pilgrimage at the foot of the mountains. The Ganges River emerges from the mountainside here. The Shastras say that this sacred river was originally located in heaven, but it was allowed to flow to earth due to the prayers of a certain sage. Ganga was angry at being brought down from heaven, and Shiva, to save the earth from the shock of her fall, stood upon the mountain and caught Ganga in his bunch of matted hair, and detained her there for a while, after which 1 drop was permitted to fall on the mountain, and from this sprang the most sacred river of the world, to which the millions of India resort to wash away their sins. Its bathing area and adjoining temple are the main attractions at Hardware. The footmark of Vishnu, cut on a stone in the upper wall of the shrine, is an object of special reverence. Many pilgrims are crushed to death by treading on one another in their attempts to reach the spot and be first to plunge in the water afterward. Police guard is necessary to prevent many thus being crowded and drowned. The first day of the Hindu New Year is the supposed anniversary of the day when the Ganges first appeared upon earth. There is always a great gathering on this day. Chundra Lela bathed here with the rest, and saw such sights of wretchedness and suffering among those who had come for the same purpose as she, that her naturally brave but tender heart almost sank within her. She travelled towards Kashmir, visiting all places of sacred legend, worshipping at every shrine, and feeding the Brahmins everywhere. She came back and went to Mathura, and looked upon the spot spoken of in her sacred books, where the god Krishna held the mountain on his finger. However, she saw and heard nothing that gave her soul relief. She came to Allahabad and bathed in the spot where the Yamuna and the Ganges unite in their sacred waters. Here she remained through the Mela, lasting a month, bathing and worshipping every day. While there she visited the underground temple, worshipped the idol, and carried away leaves from the trees, which she was told grew in the midst of the temple under the earth, in the darkness, whose leaves were to heal the sick. This tree, unknown to the pilgrims, is carried in fresh every few days by the priests at night. The poor superstitious worshippers are made to believe it grew there. Chundra Lela daily read her Shastras and followed their direction in all she did. On she went, down the sacred Ganges, until she arrived at Benares, the sacred city of the Hindus. There she worshipped Shiva, the god of destruction, and made the prescribed offering of the following articles to the head Brahmin: an umbrella, a bed cover, a bed, a plate, a lamp and drinking cup, an earthen pot, a vessel for sprinkling idols, sandals, and a cow. She cast her offering of flowers upon the Ganges River and watched them float away with myriads of other such offerings, which caused the bosom of the river to look like one vast floating flower garden, leaving behind them nothing but the blackness of darkness in Chundra Lela's heart. She spent several days bathing and worshipping in the many and various shrines of that wonderful seat of idolatry. She also visited the birthplace of Ram, where she spent a month worshipping this, her favourite idol. Here she was shown, in the temple, what they claimed were the cooking utensils of Sita, Ram's wife. Near this place one of her faithful maidservants took cholera and died. Chundra Lela did everything she knew to save her life, but to no avail. The police burned the body and all the clothes. A short time after the other companion died in the same way, she was alone and brought water and did her own cooking for the first time in her life. She now became more dejected and sad. She did not know what to do next. 7 years had passed since she left her home and began this pilgrimage. While undecided as to what to do, a party of pilgrims passed her way one day. She asked them where they were going, and they said to Jagannath, "Let me join your band and go on with you. I am all alone." They told her their way lay through a dense forest, and great would be their suffering before they would reach the other side. Still she went, and suffered with them many hardships. The gold she had brought with her was growing less, as from it she had made expensive offerings, and had fed herself and her companions all these years. She ate none of the things which were given to other pilgrims. Such was her independent spirit.
Chapter 5. As a Fakir.
They arrived at a place 20 miles from Midnapore where the king lived. The king had built a resting place for pilgrims, and he sent them rice, lentils and butter every day. As they stopped to rest, Chundra Lela sat reading her Shastras when the king's servant came to distribute food, which offering she refused, saying, "I eat my own, not what belongs to others." The servant, amazed, returned to the king, saying that all had taken, excepting a woman who sat reading her sacred books. The king sent for her, and she was ushered into the presence of the queen and her maids of honour. "From whence have you come?" they inquired, "and why did you refuse the food we sent?" "My home is in Nepal," she replied, "and my father was the family priest to the king of Nepal. I pay my own way and buy my own food." "Why have you come all this distance?" again they asked. "I am trying to find God and deliverance from sin," she said. She then related her history in the presence of the king and queen, who were greatly moved by her story of the suffering she had undergone during the years of pilgrimage. "And all this I have endured in the hope of finding God." Then the king said, "You are the same as the daughter of our own family priest, and therefore as our own daughter. Stop with us and cease your wandering. Be our family priestess." She remained, and the king built her a house and gave her servants, and she became one of the king's household, teaching the women Sanskrit, reading the sacred books to them and performing worship for them. At the same time she thus equipped, she vowed to sit during the 6 hot months of the year, on the deerskin all day in the burning sun, with 5 fires built about her. And thus she sat, day after day, while sweat ran from every pore of her body. In addition to this torture, at night she stood on one foot, with the other drawn up against it, her hands pressed together before the idol. She remaining in this attitude, imploring the god to reveal himself unto her, from 12 at night until daylight. Thus, as a fakir, she went from one sacred shrine to another, remaining 3 months in a place. She was worshipped by rich and poor. Wealthy men brought the wood and kept the fire burning about her, thinking it a great act of merit on their part. During the cold season, instead of standing on one foot, she spent the night sitting in a pond, with water up to her neck, counting her beads from dark until daylight. When Chundra Lela told this part of her story to us, she said the following: "Nobody knows how long those nights were, nor how I suffered before morning. The string contained 108 beads. With each bead I called on the name of a god. With the other hand I kept account of the number of times I had gone around the string, by moving the thumb from joint to joint, as is their way of counting. In a night, I would go round the string 1,000 times, repeating the name of the gods 108,000 times. I would look towards the east for the first ray of light, and wonder if the night would ever end. When day broke, I would crawl out of the water as best I could with my benumbed limbs, and prostrating my body on the ground, would then measure my length to the spot where I was to sit all day, worshipping idols. I often slept in a sitting position. Thus I called upon Ram day and night with no response. All this I endured just to find God." During these 3 years she never tasted salt nor rice nor grain of any kind, but lived on fruit alone which she carried with her when travelling. She used to plead with the idol before her, "If thou art God, reveal thyself to me. Reach forth and take the offering I bring. Let me see, hear, or feel something by which I may know I have pleased thee, and that my great sin is pardoned and I accepted by thee." However, so far there has been no sign, no peace, and no rest.
Chapter 6. The Awful Deception of Hinduism Disclosed.
At a place called Murshidabad, Chundra Lela was seated, surrounded by the 5 fires, worshipping the idols before her, and great throngs as they passed by were bowing down to her and kissing the ashes from her feet. In the throng came the Queen of Manipur, from Assam, and worshipped her. She learned that some of the Queen's people were returning to Assam. There were sacred places in Assam she had often read of in the Shastras, and she decided to visit there too. She requested the Queen to grant her petition to go with the royal family servants, which the Queen did, giving her a letter to her son in Assam, telling him to care for her and send her on her journey. This necessitated travelling by boat several days, during which time she had continued sitting surrounded by fires burning in earthen pots, thus not allowing anything to interfere with the fulfilment of her vow. She was received with reverence by the king's son, and remained with them 15 days. He sent her on her way to the great shrines of the country with recommendations to different officials in the land. She bathed in the Brahmaputra. At one noted shrine, Chundra Lela was told by the priest that on a certain day in the year, blood would flow from the idol into which he dipped a cloth, and whoever was present on that day and received a piece of the cloth to carry away with them would have their desire, whatever it might be. She was determined to stay until that day and see for herself and get this desirable boon, although it necessitated her remaining 6 months. She continued her self-torture as before, and also made feasts for the virgin daughters of the Brahmins, and made gold offerings to the idol. On the appointed day, Chundra Lela went early in the morning to the temple to worship and to wait for the appearance of the flowing blood. The priest tried to get rid of her, telling her it was too early in the day, and to come when he should summon the rest. She went away, only to return sooner than she was wanted, and caught the priest dipping the cloth, not into the blood which had flowed from the idol, but into that of a goat he had killed for the purpose. Many hundred pilgrims that day received the mystical cloth, believing the lie the priest told, and paying the fee, but Chundra Lela would not receive it. She was thoroughly disgusted with this deception, and began from that day to search for more fallacies in the system. These priests had also told her if she had made their daughters a promise and went away without performing it, a tiger would come out of the jungle on her way and tear her to pieces. She is determined to prove this also, she said. I told a lie in order to find out whether the statement made by the Brahmin priests was true or false. I went to 2 of their daughters and told them I would give them each a set of clothes and a new cloth or dress. I went away without doing it, thinking I can but perish anyway. As I went out of the city on my way, I came to the lonely road that led through the jungle. I kept watching for the tiger to leap upon me. Every stir made my blood run cold. I went on and on, but the tiger never came. I then began to believe the priests to be a set of liars instead of holy men. From here, she went into another Raja's territory to the next shrine. Only those who were able to make special offerings were permitted to visit the shrine. The most costly and acceptable offerings that could be given she gave to the king, which were a lump of salt and a bit of opium. The common people in India could not afford to use salt in those days. The shrine was Pushu Ram, the place where the god Ram had murdered his mother. They showed her the block on which she was beheaded, and she covered it with flowers and worshipped there. Here Chundra Lela was disgusted with the greediness of the Brahmin priests. After she had given them the usual offering, they caught the garment she wore about her, and cutting it in 2, took half of it from her. She was glad to escape with her life. She had read in their sacred books the death of Parvati, the wife of Siva. Her father had made a great feast to which he invited all his sons-in-law and great personages, excepting Siva. Parvati was so heartbroken at the indignity shown her husband that she refused to attend herself. During the feasting there was a great fire burning in the courtyard, into which Parvati threw herself, whereupon her husband Siva appeared on the scene, and thrusting his spear into her burning body, flew through space with it, and, as he went, parts of the body fell to the earth, and each place which received a portion of the body became sacred. Thus Hindu mythology teaches suicide, murder, and every other vice common to man, as practiced by the gods they worship. Chundra Lela had read of this place in Assam where Parvati's eye was said to have fallen to the earth, and having alighted in the centre of a small lake, had become a bright, burning light. She was determined to see this phenomenon for herself. She travelled a long distance, and on reaching the place was shown a pond, sure enough, with a light shining on the bosom of the water. The priest told her this was Parvati's eye. She walked all about the lake, looking at the light, and wondered how an eye could burn like that in the water. She was determined to hide herself and see what came of the light. A little while after dark, she saw the priest come down and enter a boat, and go out to the centre of the pond, and replenish the oil in the little lamp that was so arranged as to be held just above the top of the water. She then lost faith, not only in the priests, but also in the teaching of the Shastras, and yet continued their practice. She remained in Assam the 3 months of the hot weather, sitting as before all day in the hot sun, with 5 fires burning around her. In the performance of this, her sacred books promised her whatever she desired of God. At the end of this time she desired to return to Calcutta. A wealthy native gentleman paid her way by ship. The captain did not wish to take her on board, covered as she was with filth and ashes, and having with her earthen vessels and wood for her fires. He told her she would have to pay more than the ordinary fare. She paid the amount he named and was allowed to embark. On the way they had a great storm. The water dashed over the vessel so that they were in imminent danger, and many thought they would be drowned. The Hindus began to cry out, Ram, save us! Chundra Lela joined them, making a great noise. The captain came on deck, and seeing their confusion, commanded them to be quiet, and pointing to heaven said, Hush, he who lives there will care for us. This was the first time she had ever heard of there being a god other than the idols she worshipped. As soon as the storm ceased, she was struck with a profound impression that she would never forget. In Calcutta, she bathed in the Ganges for a week. She then bought a pony for 9 rupees and, putting all her belongings upon it, started for Midnapore, 40 miles away. Arriving here, she remained sitting in the midst of the fire, wearing her Fakir garb and living only on fruit, until her 3 years were ended. She then went to Calcutta to bathe in the Ganges and cut off her long, matted hair, which had not been combed nor cleaned during the 3 years, and threw it, as an offering, into the river, saying, There, I have done and suffered all that could be required of mortal by God or man, and yet without avail. Oh, those long, weary years of wandering. And yet the Great Father pitied his poor, benighted child, and would finally lead her through the dense darkness, until, from the lips of one of his messengers, she should hear the gospel, believe it, and find the Saviour she had for so many years been feeling after.
Chapter 7. Breaking Her Fetters.
Chundra Lela returned to Midnapore, where she had gathered together a number of disciples. Among them was a little boy of whom she was very fond, and who had come to her in the following way. One day a woman came, and bowing down to her and kissing the ashes from her feet, said, I have one great sorrow. I am childless, and my husband will marry another wife, if I do not bear him a son. What offering can I make the gods by which I may obtain a son? I know not what offering will obtain for you this blessing, my sister, said Chundra Lela. But I do know a root which is a medicine, not a charm. And if, through disease or physical weakness, you are barren, if you will take this medicine you will become well, and it may be you will become a mother. The woman was pleased with the thought, and took the medicine, and in time became the happy mother of a son. This son was brought and dedicated to Chundra Lela, who taught him from his infancy. After her return, there was a native official who had often seen her sitting beside the road, engaged in worship or teaching her disciples. This man's wife sent for her to come and read the Shastras to her. They were so pleased with her that the native gentleman gave her a room for herself and her idols, which she had carried with her in all her wanderings. She here taught many women the Shastras and performed worship for them, although she herself had lost all faith in her idols. She also had access to the homes of many leading families and spent her time in instructing her disciples in the sacred books of Hinduism. Finally, Chundra Lela became so disgusted with it all that she gathered up her idols and carried them away to the house of a boostrum, a caste rather low in the scale, and left them with the woman, saying, You may worship these if you like. I have done them homage many long, weary years, all in vain. I will never worship them again. There is nothing in Hinduism, or I would have found it. Into the home of her little disciple she went often. Soon his sister was married, and went to live in her father-in-law's house in another part of the city, which was near the mission, which was the home of our late Dr. Phillips. His sister, Julia, was then a female missionary of the American Free Baptist Mission, and taught this newly married girl, whose name was Parvati. One day, Chundra Lela went to visit her, and found her reading Christian books, the first she had ever seen. Where did you get these books, Parvati? She asked.
The lady who comes to teach me brought them,
Parvati answered. Could I see this lady?
You come tomorrow at 3 o'clock and you will see her. It is the day she comes to teach me.
I will be sure to come. Chundra Lela went, but something had prevented Miss Julia from going. An old Bible woman and a young girl, Sorji, went in her stead. They were so struck with Chundra Lela and her great desire to see the lady that they came back and told Mrs. Phillips that they had seen a wonderful priestess who wished to hear them read. The next day, both Mrs. Phillips and Miss Julia went to see her, and on that day from their lips, Chundra Lela heard the gospel for the first time. She asked them to teach her Bengali grammar and bought a book from them. The ladies then handed her a Bible, told her it was our religious book, and asked her to read it. She paid them 8 annas for it and took it home with her and began to read it day and night. She gathered up a school for them, and the missionary ladies, with their Christian helpers, taught her and the school. She was not satisfied with this, but soon began going to the mission house, where she might hear more about Jesus and this new religion. She was faithfully instructed and soon began to love her Bible, so that she not only read it herself, but taught it to her disciples. When they came to hear her read and expound the Ramayana and Shastras as before, she said, "I will not read these, but will read my new book to you." "Why do you not read the old books to us?" they asked. "Oh," said Chundra Lela, "this new book is a good book." The women listened, delighted, but the men said, "What is this you are reading to us? Christian books. You are going to be a Christian. Don't go to the missionary's house anymore. We will bring you a teacher who will teach you Bengali grammar in our house." "No," she answered, "I will not read with an expert. I wish to go to the lady and learn from her." They then threatened her, saying, "If you become a Christian, we will all turn you out, and people will call you mad, and beat and stone you. The Christians will soon get tired of you and throw you off. Then what will you do?" "Jesus is God," she replied. "If I die for him, I will be saved. I'm not afraid. You people cannot hold me, and need not try. You yourselves ought to become Christians." She then began to tell them about Jesus, and explained the gospel to the throngs that gathered about her. After she had been taught 2 months, Chundra Lela told the missionaries she wished to become a Christian. One day, while she was in the mission house, Dr. Phillips and his father came into the room. The latter asked, "What country are you from?" "My home is in Nepal." "Are you a saint or sinner?" she answered. "My father and mother were born in sin, and I likewise. I have worshipped idols in all countries, and told many lies, and done many vain things. Can I say I am good?" Dr. Phillips then asked, "You say you have worshipped all these idols. Have you got pardon for your sin?" "I have worshipped every idol I know. I've gone all pilgrimages, and done all the Hindu religion has taught, but I know nothing about pardon, and have had no peace," was the reply. "Cannot your idols forgive sins?" continued Dr. Phillips. "If not, how will you get pardon?" She answered, "I have now read about Jesus, and learned that he is the Saviour and can save and pardon me. Believing this, I wish to become a Christian." Miss Phillips then said, "You have seen many temples of Hindu gods, but have you ever seen our church?" "No," she answered, "I've never been in a Christian temple. When can I come?" "Tomorrow afternoon we have service. Be sure to come." She then showed her the church. Chundra Lela gives the following account of the first time she ever attended Christian worship. "I went at the time appointed. My hair had grown again until it lay on my neck. I still wore the dhoti, with nothing covering my waist. But as I entered the church, I drew the end of the cloth over my head and about my body. Dr. Phillips was in the pulpit. From his lips I heard my first sermon. Oh, what a sermon! While I sat listening, my heart was stirred within me, and I felt I had found that for which I had long sought. I wished to leave Hinduism, with all its cruel deceptions, and come out at once. After the service, Dr. Phillips and the native pastor came to see me. I said to the former, "Sahib, I wish to be baptized." He answered, "When you become a Christian, you will have great sorrow. All will forsake you, and if you get no rice to eat, what will you do then?" I answered, "God feeds the birds. Will he not feed me? He who made the mouth, can he not put food into it? God will take care of me. I am not afraid." He then heard my name for the first time. From the church I went back into my Hindu home, but could not sleep or rest. I would lie awake at night, wondering when I could leave all and become the Lord's. For another week she continued learning. At the end of that time she went to Dr. Phillips and told him that she wished to prepare to come away from her Hindu friends, that she had some money and brass vessels in the house of a friend some distance away, and asked if she had better go and get them. Dr. Phillips said to her, "I fear if you go, Satan will say, 'Here, take this money and stay here, and not let you come back any more.'" "Then I will never go," said Chundra Lela. She told him about the idols that she had carried in all her pilgrimages, and her Hindu books which she had stored away in the Boostrom's house, and Dr. Phillips sent an old woman with her to bring them away. She put them in her disciples' house where she was staying. They asked her if she intended to worship them that night, if that was why she had brought them. Her reply was, "No, I have left all that long ago." These idols and books she afterwards made over to Dr. Phillips. Among them was the little image of Ram, which she had carried with her in all her journeyings and had worshipped incessantly all those years. On a Tuesday morning, shortly after this, she gathered together all her belongings and took them over to the native pastor's house. The news soon spread everywhere that she had gone, and her disciples and many Hindus gathered together and went to persuade her, who so long had been their priestess and leader, to return to them. She went out on the veranda and assured them she was no longer a Hindu and could never teach Hinduism again. To prove to them that she meant what she said, she called the pastor's wife to bring her a cup of water and, taking it from this Christian's hand, drank it before them. She then asked another Christian for his hookah and sat down and smoked with the group of Christians, thus breaking her caste in the presence of those who had come to take her back. They went away saying sorrowfully, "Now her caste is gone, she is nothing more to us." Chundra Lela smoked then, but has not since. For many years she has believed smoking and drinking intoxicants to be incompatible with a pure heart, a truth I believe everyone filled with the Spirit will confirm. A few days after, the Raja's son, in whose palace she had been 7 years, and who lived 20 miles away from Midnapore, hearing she had gone among Christians, sent an elephant on which to bring her away. Learning that she had broken caste, they returned without seeing her. Chundra Lela afterwards went to his palace and preached Christ to them and taught him the Bible. He is now convinced of the truth and would declare himself a Christian were it not for his people and position. She lived a month with the native pastor's family, paying the woman who gave her food to eat 5 rupees. She spent much of this time in reading the Bible and studying the doctrines of the Christian faith. On a day never to be forgotten by Chundra Lela, and a day many others have since praised the Lord for, she, in the presence of a number of people, was baptized by Dr. Phillips. No one could wish any greater honour than to have that sacred ordinance administered by such a man. Nor no greater privilege could anyone covet than to administer the rite which made free from heathenism such a woman.
Chapter 8. Money-making and Preaching.
After her baptism, Chundra Lela was sent with the other workers to teach in the zanana and schools, but she could not settle down to teach children their alphabet and women to read, but began to take the Bible and to preach from house to house, and in the streets, great throngs gathering to hear her. She scarcely stopped to eat or rest during the day. At night, she would cook and eat her food. The missionaries, seeing this, set her apart for this work, and let her go where she liked. The first 3 years she spent in and about Midnapore, preaching everywhere. 2 years after she became a Christian, her brother came with a number of people from Nepal on a pilgrimage to Jagannath. On his way, he stopped to see Chundra Lela and spent 2 weeks with her, living and eating in a separate house, but drinking in from her the beautiful teachings of Jesus and his wonderful salvation. Dr. Phillips gave him a Bible. He also attended services in the church and then returned home. Chundra Lela spent some time in the work, going out on short journeys when she conceived the plan of going to Murshidabad, where she had gone before as a pilgrim and lived among the people, preaching Christ where she used to worship idols. She started and in some places remained a month at a time, preaching and teaching the pilgrims who came and went. In one place, where she wished to remain a month, she found she was likely to fall short of money, so she invested $4 in wood and mangoes and set up a little shop under a peepal tree, which she also made her preaching stand, thinking she would preach and sell her goods too, and thus make enough to keep her in food. She would begin to preach, and a crowd would gather about her, and she would become so interested in what she was telling the people that she forgot all about her wood and mangoes, and they would steal them and run away. When she had sold the remainder, she found that instead of any profit, she had lost on the investment. She decided that the Lord did not wish her to sell wood and mangoes for a living, but if she would trust him, he would take care of her. Often, after she had been preaching for hours, the kind-hearted people would come and ask her if she was hungry and bring her food. She tells of one time when she had been travelling through a jungle, over rough and almost impassable roads, with nothing to eat or drink but the sap of a plant that she found on the way. At evening time, she came out into a little village, tired and hungry, but sat down and began to preach as usual to the people, many gathering about her to hear the gospel for the first time. She became so interested that she forgot her hunger until a woman asked her what she was going to eat. She said she did not know. The woman then asked if she might bring her food and went away, soon returning, bringing her a delicious plate of curry and rice with curd and some native sweets. Chundra Lela thanked God for so bountifully supplying her wants, and after eating, lay down and slept sweetly, and arose next morning, well and strong, for the work of another day. She returned to Midnapore to help Dr. Phillips in his work in the district. She was about to embark on an evangelistic journey when the doctor said to her, "I'm afraid for you to go thus, without any money for food. When you were a Brahmin priestess, then the people would feed you, but now they may not do it, and you will suffer. Suppose you take a bag of books with you and sell them and live on the money." She agreed to it, although not without some apprehensions. Taking the bag of books, she started on her journey. She sold a few, but when she came into the crowded bazaar and began to preach, she again became so interested in the people and the message she was delivering that she forgot her books, and they were stolen. When she returned, she went to Dr. Phillips, and giving him the empty bag and telling him what had happened, said, "Sahib, I cannot attend to worldly business. My only business is to preach the gospel." It would be well if other ambassadors of Christ had their commission as clearly settled as had Chundra Lela. After that, her friends insisted on her carrying a little money for her food in case of necessity. The Lord laid it on her heart to visit every village in the Midnapore district and to preach Christ in every house in each village, so if possible, to reach every soul in the district with the gospel. Thus she went praying and preaching all over the country, it requiring 6 months for her to complete this tour. Some who heard became Christians, a number of whom were afterwards cast off by their own people. Chundra Lela took them in and cared for them until they got a start for themselves. Would to God we had a host of such workers! We need those who are willing to go from house to house, reaching the people next to them who have not heard the gospel. Such work is not so romantic as running to distant places where the missionary has not been, thinking that when each nation has been touched, then Christ will come. But some have understood Jesus to say, "Go to every creature," and that he means every individual. Such are willing to do the hand-to-hand everyday work, which every true missionary will find plenty of everywhere, down among the millions who know not God. Oh, that the Lord of the harvest would multiply such workers 1,000-fold. There is no trouble in finding appointments for such people. A brother's son came to see Chundra Lela some time after this, and she began to teach him about Jesus and to pray for his conversion. It was not long until he accepted Christ and wished to be baptized, but being underage, the missionaries sent him back to his people. Shortly after this he died, but Chundra Lela believed he was genuinely saved. She worked with the missionaries in different districts, as she had with Dr. Phillips in Midnapore, they all feeling she was a power in the work, but she felt the call to other people, and was soon planning another Christian crusade.
Chapter 9. Baptizing her own brother.
This time, Chundra Lela began a pilgrimage lasting several years, going over the old pilgrimage trail from shrine to shrine, and place to place, but this time happy in Jesus, rejoicing in the privilege of telling her people of the wonderful Saviour she had found. She also wore her clean, neat, white native dress, with her body clean and well-fed. At the religious festival in Allahabad, where thousands and thousands come every year, she spent the month preaching. The Hindu priests became so enraged as she exposed their deception before the people that they threatened to beat her and did hire a mob to attack her. When they came, she was sitting on the ground, preaching to the throng about her. She spoke to the leader in such a brave, quiet way, asking them why they stoned their friend, the one who was warning them of danger ahead. When they took up stones to throw at her, she said, "Throw them if you will, but you will hurt yourselves instead of me. I do not wish God to punish you." In some way she was able to control them by kind words and her fearless manner, so that not one would hurt her, but went away, leaving her to finish her discourse. She went to most of the leading shrines she had before visited, all through Assam and Sylhet, visiting the very queen who had been so kind to her when she was a fakir. In her palace she read the Bible and preached Jesus. The queen's son was wonderfully impressed. As he recognized the same face, in spite of the change, he said, When we saw you last, you were sitting on the ground with 5 fires burning around you, worshipping idols all the time. Now you come with another book and tell us you have found the Saviour. Tell us what has caused this change." She told them how disappointed she had been when she had searched to the bottom of Hinduism and found nothing, and how, through faith in Jesus, she had found salvation and peace. Many listened and believed, but were not willing to pay the cost and come out and confess Christ. She went to her own land, Nepal, after an absence of 27 years, and in that nation, whose doors are shut to the Christian missionary, she preached Christ wherever she went. She attended the Barachata festival, a religious gathering attended by people from all parts of Nepal. She preached to everyone she met and gave out portions of the Bible and Christian tracts to the people, who carried them with them all over the land. While doing this, she was arrested by the police and taken up before the magistrate for distributing Christian literature. The magistrate asked her who she was, and she told him she was a Nepalese and was only giving good books to her own people. He gave her permission to give them to her own friends and released her without punishment. She went back into the bazaar and continued preaching without molestation until the festival was over. She visited her own people and found her brother, who had visited her at Midnapore, very ill. She stayed with him for some time, caring for him and nursing him as tenderly as a mother would her child. One day he called her to him and said, "Sister, I believe in Jesus and have been trying to serve him ever since the teaching I had when I went to see you. Do you think he will receive and save me?" "Certainly, brother. That is just what he died to do." "You think he will?" he said earnestly. "I had intended to take my family and go to Midnapore and come out openly and be baptized and live with Christian people, but I fear now I will never live to do that. I feel my days are few, but I wish to die a Christian. And you think Jesus will receive me anyway?" "Yes, brother. I know he will receive you now." "Do you give your soul and body to him?" "Yes, I do, and I believe Jesus does save me." "Oh, I wish I could be baptized." "But, brother, there are no Christian missionaries here, no, not one in all our land," said Chundra Lela yearningly. "And how could I bring one so far?" "You could not," said the dying man, "for there would not be time. But, Lela, you are a Christian and you preach the gospel. Why could you not baptize me? I don't want to die without publicly declaring that I am a Christian." Chundra Lela thought for a moment, and then looked into the face of her beloved brother, for whom she had so long prayed, and then said, "Surely God would not be angry with me for doing such a thing. When I have performed all kinds of official and priestly services before heathen gods, I surely can do this for him." She quietly left the room and returned, bearing in her hand a brass bowl of water. Placing it on the ground, she reverently knelt by her brother's bedside, and pouring out a heartfelt prayer to God, who had so wonderfully led and saved her, and had now answered her prayer in the salvation of her brother, she asked him to bless the water she was about to use, and to fill her brother with the Holy Spirit. She then, still kneeling, took the water, and dipping it with her hand, poured it upon the head of her brother, saying, "My brother, I baptize you, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen." She bowed her head in silence, and it seems to me that during that solemn ceremony, the angels and the Saviour himself must have hovered over that couch and filled that room, away there in the centre of that heathen nation, with the glory of heaven. As she rose, a sweet smile of peace had settled upon her brother's face, who, like her, was no longer a heathen worshipping false idols, but a Christian, a believer in Jesus Christ. A few days later, the angels made another visit to that room and carried her brother away with them. His heathen friends prepared at once to burn his body, as is their custom, but Chundra Lela had been asking God to grant her the privilege of seeing her brother buried as a Christian. She pleaded with her friends without avail. They said, "You need not think, because you are a Christian, we are to do like you." "But," she pleaded, "my brother was a Christian and died a Christian," telling them what had transpired, he, himself, having testified to the same before his death. Still, they would not heed her pleading. She still prayed, holding on to God to grant her this one more boon. It was in the rainy season, and had been wet, but now the rain began to pour in torrents. The body was prepared and carried to the burning ghat, Chundra Lela following, pleading still with God not to let them burn her brother. The funeral pyre was surrounded with water, and still it rained. They placed the body on the pyre and attempted to light the wood, but could not. Again and again they attempted to fire the wood, but without avail. The rain still poured, and the water rose higher and higher about the wood. As it grew towards night, Chundra Lela stepped forward and said, "My friends, do you not see our God does not intend to let you burn one of his children as a Hindu? He has heard my prayer and sent this rain to prevent you. Desist and grant me this beloved body before God in some dreadful way prevents you." They yielded and followed Chundra Lela as she had the body borne away and the grave dug and her brother buried as a Christian.
Chapter 10. Should Women Preach and Evangelize?
When Chundra Lela first came to our home 2 years ago, we were at least once in our lives privileged to entertain an angel, unaware. Her face first impressed us, and then her calm, unruffled spirit. Soon we saw her devotion in God's work, not waiting for others, but going every day, from early morning till late in the evening, preaching and witnessing everywhere. One day she would be found sitting at the feet of a native princess, reading the Bible to her and the women of the palace. Another day in the bazaar, preaching to the crowds that come and go. At other times we have seen her come quietly into a room filled with educated native gentlemen, and seating herself in her favourite position on the floor began to talk to them. At first they are inclined to ridicule her, but she goes on, until soon they forget she is a woman and are astonished at her knowledge of their own sacred books, of which she is able to repeat, from memory, page after page. Soon they feel her superiority, and one after another in their intense interest, draw nearer and take their seat on the ground before her. She will hold them for hours, telling them of their own religion and its emptiness. She then presents Jesus in such a way that it seems to make them want to know him. She preaches in 4 different languages. Her simple habits, her forgetfulness of self, her intense interest in others, and her great faith in God are traits of character that seldom blend in one person and make her life beautiful. She is now about 65 years of age and begins to grow feeble and her eyesight dim, but she still travels 40 and 50 miles distantly to preach, holding meetings in different parts, working and praying for the salvation of the people. The numbers who have been led to Christ by her will never be known until she receives her crown. Not long ago, she was out in the district with some missionary ladies and Bible women. A large number of people had gathered. Chundra Lela had been preaching and giving some of her strong arguments in favour of Christianity when one of the missionaries said to the head man, "How can you answer such truths as these?" "Oh," said the Hindu, "these women know nothing. Wait till you hear our priest's wisdom." And he walked away to call a man who came in his Brahmin garb and took his place among the people in great dignity. As he began to speak, Chundra Lela recognised in him one of her old disciples, and after greeting him pleasantly, said to the people, "All this man knows I taught him, for it was I who gave him his mantras." She had taught him to repeat prayers to the gods and to perform religious rituals. She then explained to them how false she had found all these things to be, and how real and blessed were Christianity's teachings. This made a great impression on all who heard it. Chundra Lela, for 30 years, has thus been preaching the gospel all over this dark land, to congregations immense and small, and all the while great assemblies of wise men are spending days discussing the important question of whether women should be allowed to evangelize and preach or not, and some are even hesitating about it being the proper thing for her to pray in public. The press and the pulpit, with bodies of reverend gentlemen and great bishops of the church, have been agitated to white heat over the momentous question of whether women shall or shall not be allowed to sit with them in the general conference. While the propriety of these things is being discussed and legislated upon, Chundra Lela goes on reaching the thousands of both educated and ignorant, of high and low, of men and women who are thrilled and held for hours captivated by her spiritual power. She pours forth the life-giving words in such a way as the most reverend doctor of divinity might covet. And so it will be to the end. Women really called of God and anointed for this work will go on doing it all the same, whether licensed by man or not. Such women little care whether they have a seat in the general conference or not. Would that our people in the dear homeland, instead of being so taken up with such trifling things, were more concerned about how to reach these millions of unsaved souls. Would that more were willing to sacrifice or suffer if need be, that the gospel might reach these hungry ones. Oh, the diamonds in the rough all about us, even like Chundra Lela, in the offensive and disgusting garb of the Fakir whom we see sitting in his filth and ashes. Who will help gather them out of this great mining field? If our friends at home could only see them swarming like bees, crawling about in the darkness with no one to teach them, none to care for their souls, oh, I am sure, Hearts would be stirred as never before, and God's children would say, "Here, Lord, am I to go myself or send my substitute?" The horrors of the famine, the devastation of the plague, and the destruction of the earthquake are written and talked about everywhere. However, there is nothing so awful as these restless millions living and dying without God. Not only from home do we want the workers, but from this country. Oh, that the Lord would send into his harvest field an army composed of such as Chundra Lela, saved themselves, and living to make him known to the unsaved of their own people. Then would this desert soon blossom as the rose, and they would soon be ready to meet Jesus, at his coming, a beautiful church from India. For they shall be gathered out of all nations. Hear Chundra Lela as she says, "All this I suffered to find God. What have we done to make him known? What have we done to make him known?"
Chapter 11. A Pilgrimage in Her Old Age.
It is the week of prayer. Representatives from our native Christian community all over the city of Calcutta are gathered in the chapel to link their prayers with those of the Christian world. One, with the plainest white dress and grey hair, with a somewhat feeble step, enters and takes her seat, and is soon absorbed in the devotion of the hour. It is Chundra Lela. She has just arrived from the boat, out on another Christian pilgrimage, restless to go, yet not knowing where the Spirit would lead her. After the service is over, a fine-looking native gentleman approaches her, and after the usual Oriental salutation asks, "Is this Chundra Lela?" "Yes, my son, but I do not recognize you." "Do you remember being at the Mag Festival at Allahabad about 14 years ago?" "Yes, I was there." "Do you recall a hot discussion you had with a group of Brahmin priests one day, and how, being unable to defeat your arguments in favour of Christianity, they one after another went away? Do you remember a young Hindu lad coming up to you at the close and telling you of the unrest in his heart? And you said, 'Young man, if you wish to make a success of life in this world and make sure of the life to come, forsake your false religion and become a true Christian.' I am that man. I never got rid of your last sentence. I determined that day to know Christ. For 2 years I beat about in the dark before I found him. It seemed so hard to leave all for his sake. At last I came out and was baptized, and have been a Christian for 12 years. I am now a professor in the London Mission College of this city." Chundra Lela rejoiced greatly. She had not seen his face since that day, and now a respectable, useful Christian man stands before her. "In my village 40 miles from here," he continued, "all my people are Hindus. My father's house is still full of idols. Won't you go and tell them of their mistake and how you found God? I have a fortnight's vacation. Come with me, and we will try and save some of those dear to me." Chundra Lela took it as from the Lord and answered, "Yes, I will go. When can you start?" "Tomorrow morning." "All right, I will be ready." She went, and for 2 weeks testified day and night in that Hindu village where no missionary had ever been, warning them of the wrath to come and pleading with them to accept Christ. His brother's wife, a widow, believed and was converted, and she and her children became candidates for baptism. His mother and father were deeply convinced, but lacked the courage to confess Christ. They being a leading and most influential family in the village, there was much excitement over the stranger who lodged with them and preached such wonderful words all over the town. The Brahmin priests were stirred to white heat and, being full of wrath, attacked Chundra Lela as she was preaching in the bazaar. They called her a beef-eating Christian, an outcast. She answered, "Do you say that only Christians eat beef? Do you not remember that it is written in the Hindu Shastras, your sacred books, that on one occasion the gods ordered the Brahmins to sacrifice bullocks, this being the only offering which would appease the wrath of a certain deity and enable them to escape his vengeance, and also commanded the Brahmins themselves to eat of the flesh, and it was done. So Brahmins have eaten beef and are not defiled. Why may not Christians eat of it?" They were defeated and left amid the cheers of the people, and Chundra Lela continued her preaching without further interruption. After her adventures, she came home to rest for a while. Lifting a blanket a missionary had given her because it was cold weather, she said, "Just see how my friends trouble me. How can a travelling fakir be burdened with such a bundle?" Her skill in responding to arguments against the Christian religion and the spirit in which she receives the abuse of enraged opponents is marvellous. A friend who met her at a festival told us he heard her preaching Christ with great power, and throngs of idolaters drew near to hear. One of the priests, being angry, called out, "I will beat your Christ with my cane," she answered mildly. "You may beat our Christ with a stick, but he will not break to pieces, as will this idol of yours. You cannot destroy our God. He is not made of wood and stone." Many are the recitals of experiences when, on returning from such trips, she turns in to rest a while with us. One was about a family she has taught for years, and is now turning towards Christianity. The son is ready for baptism, but is waiting for his old father. For should he, the eldest son, become a Christian, and leave the old man to die a Hindu, who would light his funeral pyre, a duty belonging to this member of the family? Chundra Lela spent days with the old man, teaching and entreating him, but he, though convinced, has grown old in Hinduism. How can he at this age break the fetters of caste and endure the persecution which becoming a Christian will entail? It is hard for those of Christian nations to understand the sacrifice it means, and these secret disciples, not being able to take up the cross, can never know the peace salvation brings. "What do you think?" said Chundra Lela one day, as she took her place on the floor at my feet, as was her habit. "What do you think? That the missionary gentlemen of the American Baptist Mission have built me a house to die in." When they first mentioned it to me, I said, "What? A house to die in? Do you know where I am to die? It might be in the train or on the river steamer. It might be in the distant jungle, or perhaps while preaching in the street. How will you gentlemen build me a place to die in?" "Oh," said they, "it is true we do not know, but when you are ill, as you were a few months ago, or tired, and wish to rest a while, it will be well for you to have a house of your own." How you friends do trouble me. What would I do with a house? I wish to be free from care. Then, too, it would cost money to keep it up. Very well, but we will give you a pension of a small amount monthly, and from this you could keep it in repair. And I yielded. One day, after the conference was over and we were back in Midnapore, the missionaries said to me, "Come and see the spot we have selected for your house under these mango trees, where you will be nice and quiet." "What?" I said, "away off in this field?" "Oh no, if you will build me a house, build it on the roadside close up, so that when I'm too old and weak to walk, I may crawl up to the door and preach to the people as they pass by." And they granted my request, and now I can preach as long as I live. Dear reader, may we all love our calling as much as she did. There would not be so many retired preachers and Christian workers, and that many more would die at their post in the line of duty. Such workers God could afford to keep alive upon the earth. Those whose meat and drink is to preach his word. The Lord give us thousands of such for the harvest field of India.
Chapter 12. Conversion of a Leper Girl.
People who live and work for others, and who are themselves members of that great family, part in heaven, part on earth, and of which God is the Father, come to realize the brotherhood of man in a unique way. We are all so similar after all. We may not have the same skin color, but a man is a man. Disease and suffering affect our bodies equally. We have the same hopes and fears, heartaches and sorrows, and are prone to the same sins. We are all links of the one great chain, and God intended it so. In this country of India there is no disease more dreadful than that of leprosy. No wonder it is used in the Bible as a type of sin, something that resembles and points to the corruption of sin. Like sin, it occurs almost unconsciously to the individual. Seldom do people suddenly commit great crimes. It begins with a little sin. Slowly the conscience hardens and greater wrongs are committed. And finally, when far from God and completely in Satan's hands, the awful sin is committed. Likewise, leprosy begins as a slight ailment, then becomes rough or blotchy on the skin, then becomes dead on the fingers, then dead on the joints, until it attacks the very vitals and kills them, and their life is exterminated. Oh, the long, dreary process. Like sin, it brings many woes along with it. First, separation from others, removal from home, inactivity, loathsomeness, and so on. Also, like sin, leprosy often can be hidden for years. In a mission orphanage was a famine girl whom we called Liza. Her parents were Hindus. She remembers seeing her father carried out of the house when he was thought to be dying, and hurried off to the Ganges River so that he might die on its sacred banks. The friends watched for a while. Still he did not die. Soon they became tired. Then watchers were appointed, for the poor creature no longer ate nor drank, but must lie in the heat of the sun day by day, and in the dew or the rain of night, until Yama, the god of death, saw fit to call him. These watchers finally became tired, so long did life linger, until, all patience exhausted, one of them took the mud of the river, and filling his mouth and nostrils, suffocated the poor sufferer. And was he not performing a holy rite, aiding the god Yama in his work of destruction? And was not his victim ready to go? For his feet were in the holy waters of the Ganges, and his last word was to mumble the name of the goddess, Mother Gunga. Soon the famine took Liza's mother and every friend, and she, a little girl, alone in the world and a starving skeleton, was brought to the orphanage. There she was carefully taught and came to womanhood, useful, bright and happy. It was her wedding day. The mission compound was full of guests. Everybody was in their cheery mood. Of course, Liza did not know her intended husband. It was contrary to all rules of society for her to converse with a man before the marriage ceremony. But why need she fear? He had been highly recommended to the head missionary lady, and he was said to be a good man, a catechist, and all thought she was very fortunate and would be very happy, and she tried to appear so now. The bridegroom came neatly and nicely dressed. Oh, if we could only know what lies underneath the coat. A beautiful exterior often covers a heart black with sin. The evil spirit of crime often appears dressed as an angel of light. How short-sighted we are, and how often cruelly deceived. All were assembled, the ceremony finished, congratulations were offered, and the innocent bride was led away to her new home. In a few days she returns to the mission in dire distress, begging the missionary to deliver her from such a fate. "Why, what has happened, Liza? Is your husband a drunkard?" "Oh, no." "Is he unkind?" "No." "What then has happened?" "Oh, my husband is a leper. Just think, tied forever to a leper." And the usually happy girl sobbed aloud. Yes, there was the awful white spot on his chest, which he had been able to hide for years. But as with sin, it is out now. Be sure your sin will find you out. But as in this case of leprosy, it is out but not till many innocent hearts are broken, and a chain of sinful causes set to work which will never end through all eternity. The girl was taken into the mission, and being a Christian was not compelled to live with him longer, as she would have had to do had she been a Hindu. The unhappy man went away to spend his few lingering years of misery alone. Her child was born, and still remains untainted. But the dread of what the future may unfold hangs over the mother and child, like an avalanche, ready to fall upon them at any moment. Thank God, if there is no cure for leprosy, there is for sin, cleansing in the blood of Jesus. And the consequences we can only leave with a merciful, overruling God. A girl born in the dark land of India, in a little home among the mango trees and palm trees of beautiful Bengal, was, as all children are, the joy of her mother's heart. Although a girl, she had become very dear to her simple-hearted father. A school was opened for girls in the neighbourhood, which created quite a stir among the people. Some said it was possible for even girls to learn to read and write, and, if our neighbours' girls can, so can our daughter, the parents said, and some plan must be devised for her to attend school. The way opened, and she soon became an interesting pupil. Her progress was encouraging. She was delighted with the prospect of one day being able herself to teach, and thus earn her own living, and be looked up to by all. But how fickle all human hopes. Her body became feverish, her blood heated. Soon after, a small spot appeared on her body, and daily increased in size. Dread took possession of her heart. Sad forebodings haunted her friends. Could it be? To be so successful in school, just in sight of reaching the coveted goal, to now be most loathed by all? Is it possible that all cherished hopes have been shattered forever? She was taken to a physician. After a careful examination, during which all stood in breathless expectation, dreading to hear what they already knew, the doctor's face became sad. He tried to hide his feelings, but he must be true. "Yes," he said, "your child is a leper." The girl trembled with emotion. "What?" she said. "And can I no longer stay in school? Is there no hope of it being something else?" And the girl wept as though her heart would break. Another doctor, a specialist, was consulted. The verdict was, and it sounded like her death warrant, leprosy of the worst type. Segregation must be insisted upon. Marriage forbidden. The girl left his presence broken-hearted, every hope gone. In a few weeks she was sent to the leper asylum, there to spend the remainder of her days in suffering untold, mingling with other loathsome creatures like herself. She wept day and night. How could she ever be reconciled to such a life? Everything is so dark and hopeless. Even the kindness of the missionary brings no comfort. She sits by herself, gloomy and sad, and wonders if there is a God after all. Listen up, what is that which breaks on her ears? It sounds like the school gong of former days. What can it mean? Then a crier went about beating a drum and saying, "Come out into the commons. A woman is preaching the words of Christ. Come." It was sunset. A large throng was gathering. She too went and stood on the outskirts of the crowd. In the centre was the feeble, grey-haired preacher, but whose voice soon took on supernatural strength, and her face was fired with the light of God's Holy Spirit. It was Chundra Lela. She was telling the people of a Saviour who could save from all sin, and bring joy and comfort to any heart. Soon after, the old servant of God found the sad leper girl and set her heart upon leading her to Christ. She remained with her, working day and night for this soul until the girl yielded, gave her heart to Jesus, and he came to live within her, bringing light and joy and peace forever. What a change! With her eyes no longer on earth, the poor leper girl saw only a few months or years of suffering and isolation, and then home and heaven. She now, by faith, lived in the land where no disappointments ever come, where no pain, sorrow, or death can ever enter. Yes, how happy now the face which may be seen passing in and out among the other lepers, telling them of a brighter day, of the beautiful country beyond, cheering and comforting all. And Chundra Lela has another star in her crown, brighter than all the rest.
Romans 10:1. Brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to God for them is that they may be saved.
This book was written by Ada Lee, who knew Chundra Lela. The following is a life sketch of the author written by Wilma Morgan in 1902. Ada Lee, the author of this wonderful biography, was born in West Virginia to poor but hard-working parents. Thirsting for education, she would walk willingly day after day in deep snow, over a rough road, to the nearest schoolhouse. However, the instructions received here did not satisfy her. To make her college education possible, a visiting relative offered to take her to Ohio, where, at the age of 14, she worked for her board while pursuing her studies. She experienced a great turning point in her life during the revival of 1873. After days of spiritual agony, a wondrous deliverance came, changing darkness into light, slavery of sin into glorious liberty, and the timid, unhappy girl into a rejoicing child of God, eager to do his will, and yet shrinking at first from obeying his voice, which seemed to say, "Go thou to India." The years of study passed, a time of testing followed, and then God opened the way. Accepted by the Union Missionary Society, the first women's society in America, the happiest soul the sun ever shone upon, to use the writer's own words, stepped on board the steamer bound for India on November 4th, after 5 years of faithful missionary service in that land, where God allowed her to see some fruit. She married Reverend David H. Lee, and they worked together for 2 years for the salvation of souls. Then his health failed, requiring them to return home, and a newborn baby with them. In the years that followed, while attending faithfully to the work entrusted to them by the home church, Mrs. Lee's heart longed for India, as a fish longs for water. Every opportunity would be taken to plead for the Bengali people in prayer and to speak of their needs. The Lord blessed her efforts. Individuals became interested, but the societies continued to decline aid on account of having their hands full already. With the assurance that God meant her to persevere, Mrs. Lee set to work to obtain a fund of $20,000. In October 1894, with the required sum in hand, and accompanied by 6 children, Mr. and Mrs. Lee started for India once more, Calcutta being their destination, where they have been working independently of any society, though in connection with the ME Church. Their 6 beautiful children died in the Darjeeling disaster in India, in which incessant rain caused a landslide, which swept away everything before it, including the place the children were. The 13-year-old Wilbur was still alive when the landslide occurred, but he died 8 days later. Nevertheless, their zeal for the gospel has not been diminished by this great sorrow. Mr. Lee devotes his time to city mission work and labours among the Bengali students. Mrs. Lee has a training school and a home for girls, in which over 100 of the destitute class receive shelter, while about 80 others come from outside to attend day school. All the teaching is given in Bengali. The girls retain their national costume and are trained in a way suitable to their status in life, while instruction in house and needlework forms an important part of the training. The first and only object in opening the school was to lead to Christ those who would become workers among their own people. Several of the girls, mostly widows, have already become Bible women and teachers, and are doing good work in the zenanas, part of a Hindu or Muslim dwelling that is reserved for the women of the household, and among the young. The mission buildings, almost in the centre of the city, are small and confined, making privacy or quiet impossible. An extension is contemplated, which will be carried into effect as soon as the needed funds have come in for the proposed Lee Memorial Building, which is to serve as a permanent home for the institution.
To listen to more free audiobooks, visit scrollreader.com. We've also made this book available in print and hard copy form.